This position comes from one of my games that I played several years ago. I was playing with the white pieces, and I was running kind of low on time here. I had about 8 minutes until the end of the game with I think 30-second increments. So I wanted to simplify the position and put pressure on this bishop on c6, so I played bishop to e4, and black counterattacked my bishop with d5. Here I noticed that the bishop is pinned, and if I distract the rook on e5, I should be able to take this pawn. So I played pawn to b4, and here my opponent spotted an interesting opportunity to complicate the game, and because I was in time trouble, he thought it was a good idea. He could have simply played something like rook takes a3, and the position would probably simplify quite a bit. And in a position like this, draw would probably be the most likely result. So in the game, however, instead my opponent decided to complicate the game and to sacrifice the exchange, and give up this rook here on a5. And I'll just go through the rest of the game and show what happened. So he took on e4, and of course I have to capture back on a5, and now he gets the strong passed pawn on f3, and that's not the end of it, because he also picks up the f pawn, and it seems like black should be pretty solid here. He has he's gonna have two passed pawns, and he will also have a chance to maybe even win this guy on h6. So it seems like a very promising sacrifice, but as I said, I'll just show what happened in the game from here. And everything was happening in my time trouble. So black here wants to attack and put pressure on this pawn on c2. And what he also does is he blocks the fourth rank. So he wants to play king forward and advance this pawn. So noticing that, I decided to prevent king to f4, even if that costs me the c2 pawn. So I played king g3, which is a good idea. He didn't take it. Instead he attacked the rook. I defended the rook. And here he decided to support this pawn on f3, and he played g4. White came on the 7th rank, attacking both pawns, and pretty soon it turned out that black actually cannot hold all of the pawns that he has advanced, that he has on the 7th rank. So he had to give up the b pawn, and pretty soon white won the game. And again, in time trouble, I had to play very carefully and make some extra moves to gain time on the clock, but in the end it was fairly simple. So it's taken me a while to find the winning idea, but now I finally hit it. The idea is to advance the c pawn by doing this to block the diagonal and capture the a pawn. And the idea is that if white ever gets a passed pawn in this type of position, and he prevents black from advancing his pawns, then it's going to be a win. And I just have to play a little bit carefully, but in the end it all works out. King e2, and now the pawn advances, so black has to block it. I go back and forth a few times and then capture the g pawn. It's important that if black here goes pawn to f2, then I'm just on time to play rook to f4, which wouldn't work so well if the king was on e2. But as soon as the king went to e3, this is possible. and white wins here quite easily. Rook f8, and now the idea is just to promote this pawn and to come back with the rook to the f file. There's nothing black can do. So I was pretty happy to win the game, but of course after the fact I wanted to go through it and understand what actually happened and what mistakes me and my opponent might have made. So I'll show pretty briefly how I try to analyze this position. So it's pretty clear that once white gets the passed a pawn, he's winning, because black's pawns aren't really going anywhere, and white's a pawn is just going to run, and black is eventually going to have to sacrifice the bishop for that pawn. And when you analyze a position, you basically want to kind of go back throughout the game and look at the turning points and step back move by move and see if the evaluation changes at any point. So as soon as I win the a pawn, it's pretty clear that white's winning. The evaluation doesn't change afterwards. Even though there's a lot of moves played, it's also clear that after white has won the b pawn, it's also inevitable that at some point the c pawn is going to advance, and then it will be possible for me to win the a pawn. So it's also pretty clear from here that white's winning. But it will be good to look at this turning point and say, after rook d7, does black have any defense? It's interesting to check, say, what happens if he gives up the h pawn, and say he goes king to f5. The drawback with this, of course, is that well, then white can take here, and say if then black tries to counterattack the rook and the pawn, then I have an extra move to play, and I can move the rook away with the tempo attacking the bishop, and then say after the bishop retreats, I should be able to advance the pawn here, and there's nothing black can do to prevent it from queening. So giving up the h pawn is not really an option here. Instead, he could have tried to play king to f6. This has the advantage of having the bishop still guarding both the h and the b pawn. If I try to take on g4, then there's a fork, and I would in fact lose. So instead, white has a very useful idea of rook to g7, and it turns out that here there's also no. It's hard for black to defend, because I'm still threatening to gradually grab his pawns one by one. So say if he goes bishop here, well then the b pawn falls, and this is pretty similar to the game. We know that. So what happens if he goes king to e5? Then I can take here, and because the rook is staying on the g file, this pawn is in a fair bit of danger here, and it's really hard for black to defend. The king will eventually come to e3, and we'll see that the bishop will have to leave its ideal position on e4, and it will have to drop one of the pawns. So I still cannot take the bishop, because if I take, then the pawn will advance. So I just have to carefully prepare that. And now this interesting check, the idea of which is that if black takes, then the h pawn advances, but the idea is to force the king off the good square on e6. Now again, the h pawn is going to fall. After king f6, the rook can take, and it turns out that this pawn endgame is winning, because white has an extra pawn and his king is more active. It's going to run faster towards the black pawns. So it turns out that at this point there's really already no defense for black once the rook comes to d7. So this makes me realize that in this position, when black played pawn to g4, this was already an important mistake. So here I start to look for improvement, and indeed there is one. Black should have played something like king to f5, and from here, if I go rook to d7, then the king is on time to go to g6, and now he's attacking the h-pawn, which is very important. I basically have no time to chase any of his pawns. I have no time to transfer the rook to g7, and I probably have to attack his bishop, and once the bishop moves, I kind of just have to keep the pawn guarded, and there's really no win here. Black's king is well placed, close enough to the pawns on the queen's on the king's side. So this explains what was the decisive mistake that black made. Advancing the pawn to g4 was really unfortunate, because by doing that he let the rook invade, and he has no time to come back with the king and guard the h7 pawn. So this shows very quickly how to analyze a game and trace down the mistakes that you made and that your opponent made.